On September 12, 1970, the Georgia Association of Broadcasters offered free television and radio time to the two candidates in the runoff election for governor of Georgia, Carly Sanders and Jimmy Carter, for the purpose of presenting to the people of Georgia an open and complete discussion of all the issues in the campaign. Mr. Sanders immediately accepted. Mr. Carter has refused to appear. The following program is presented at the personal expense of Mr. Sanders, in the belief that the people of Georgia are entitled to all information possible to guide them in making a fair and wise decision as to who will be their next governor. Ladies and gentlemen, former Governor Carl E. Sanders.
Good evening, my friends and fellow Georgians. I want to tell you how much I appreciate you tuning into this program tonight. It's probably the most important 30 minutes in my life. As you know, on September the 9th, I was the front runner and the favorite in the primary for the governorship of this state. And when the votes were counted, I was no longer in that position. I became the underdog. And of course, that was quite a disappointment. It was discouraging, but I might add, it was not disheartening. Because fortunately for me, I was given another chance to come before you, the people of our state, in a runoff election. And so now that I've been given that opportunity, I want to come before you tonight and to discuss some very, very important aspects of this campaign. As I look back over the long, hot summer of campaigning, and as I look at the thousands of miles that I've traveled all over Georgia, as I think about the faces that I've looked into, as I think about the cities and the towns and the counties and the hamlets that I've visited, I realize now that it was not enough for me to go into those places and communities and talk with those people about a record as a former governor and about a program for the future. I realized that some way, somehow, I failed to communicate with the people. I failed to give them that message that I was carrying in my heart. And so now it's my opportunity and it's my real privilege to try and rectify that and to try here in the last week of this election to put that message across and to come into your home and to discuss the real issues and to give you some of my background and to try and relate to you as a person and to relate to you the issues that I know and you know are so absolutely vital and important to the future of our state. Now, I've been painted in so many different ways this summer that I guess it's pretty hard for those of you who are watching this program to really know what kind of person Carl Sanders really is. Because my political opponents have pictured me in so many different ways that sometimes I find myself wondering, who am I really? And so if you would bear with me for a few minutes, I'd like to talk a little bit about who I am. I want to say in the beginning that I'm just a normal human being like you, no better, no worse than the most, that I love and I live and I try to act as I think most people do, that not only that, but that I believe in the basic principles that I think most people do. And my childhood and my life began when I was fortunate enough to be born into the lives of two wonderful parents. I was born in Augusta, Georgia, and there I came into the lives of two fine people who nurtured me and reared me and with a great deal of love and affection, one of which is still living, my mother. And of course, no child ever had a finer home. No child was ever given a better set of values to live by than the value of a good name and a good home and a faith in an almighty God. And that was about all, really, that I did have, because it was a modest home. My father was a salesman for Swift & Company, where he worked for 45 years. He never made much money, but he was a devoted family man and a good man. And I tasted the experience of leadership at an early age in my school and in my church and in my outside activities. In fact, when I was 10 years old, I started up the ladder of the free enterprise system that we all cherish in this great land. And I started as a newspaper boy, carrying the paper, 75 cents a week. I kept a quarter, and I gave my mother the 50 cents. And after I'd carried that paper and I developed a sense of responsibility, I finally got another job. I went to work at the local grocery store. And I sacked the groceries, and I also caught the flour sacks, and I worked every weekend, right up through high school. And finally, when I finished high school, I was fortunate enough to earn a scholarship to the University of Georgia to play football. That's how I got to go off to college. Otherwise, I could not have gone. But I was able to go to college because of that scholarship. And I went to the University of Georgia, and I started my college courses. And I was there for about a year and a half, and I volunteered and enlisted in the U.S. Air Force because we were then in World War II. And I left the campus to go off to serve my country along with thousands upon thousands of other young Americans. And I served my country for 3 years, and I returned to that campus. And when I came back, Uncle Sam gave me the benefit of the GI Bill of Rights. And under that GI Bill of Rights, I finished my law school. And you know, I got married just before finishing law school because I passed the bar exam about 6 months before I had completed my degree. And I returned home with my wife, hung up my shingle, and started into the practice of law. And I thought everything was going to be perfect. But I found, like so many of you, that things are never perfect. And I found that things were not going to be perfect for me or for my family. My wife, Betty, whom most of you know, and whom I love dearly and am proud of, she became seriously ill and almost died. And I had to go out and teach school at night, and I had to try to practice law in the daytime in order to make ends meet. And I prayed that she would come through her illness, and she did. And by virtue of the good, gracious God that we all have, she not only came through, but she proudly presented me in the next few years 2 fine children who I am proud of today, just as you are as parents. And so that's a little bit of the background of the man that you have seen pictured by so many people this summer as a fellow who was born with a silver spoon in his mouth and a man who's never had to work for a living. Now I want to talk about another issue that I thought was not important in this campaign. As many of you know, my personal financial worth has been made an issue in the campaign. I frankly didn't think that that was something that was relevant to the campaign. But apparently my opponent has made so many wild, irresponsible charges about it that many people have had some doubts. And so tonight I want to discuss that. I started earlier in this campaign with the premise that anyone who would try to inject a man's private affairs was absolutely out of order. Apparently that's not true either. And so now I want to talk to you about my own private affairs. I've talked with my wife and my children about it, And we've come to the conclusion that if this is what the public wants from a candidate, then I should give that information to the public. And so tonight, I'm going to provide you with this information. I have here in my hand a statement of personal net worth that was prepared from my personal records, my tax returns, by Pete Marwick and Mitchell, one of the national accounting firms of this country. That statement of net worth not only represents my present net worth, but there's also attached to this a statement showing what my net worth was when I went in the governor's office and what it was when I left. I'll make this statement available to anyone tomorrow morning. When I entered the governor's office, I'd been practicing law for some 15 years. I had been the senior member of my law firm for a number of years. I had a very successful law practice, and I had a net worth at that time of $306,296. Now, during the period of time in which I served you as governor of this state, my net worth remained about the same throughout. In fact, when I left office on December the 31st, 1966, my net worth was $301,625. So all this talk and all these insinuations that I accumulated enormous wealth during the period of time that I served as governor is absolutely false. Nothing could be further from the truth. Now, after I left the governor's office, I resumed the practice of law, and I returned to the activities that I wanted to be involved in as a private businessman. The very same thing that any man would do. And since that period of time, I now have a net worth represented on this statement of $685,000. Now, ladies and gentlemen, when I left the governor's office, due to the request, I think, of some people who were already trying to shoot me down from further public service, Governor Maddox, and rightfully so, set up an investigator to investigate administrations that had gone on before him. And I commend him for it. And I was delighted when he did so. And they examined my administration for 2 years, at the end of which they completely dropped the investigation and said, quote, unquote, Carl Sanders' administration was spotless. Now, if anybody in this state thinks that Carl Sanders has ever committed a dishonest act or a corrupt act during his service as governor, I say ask Governor Maddox. He can tell you, and he will tell you, that such is not the case because he had it investigated. And now I want to put that aside because I think that is a matter now that Mr. Carter can put his up. Of course, his financial statement was submitted several months ago, and I might add, in that financial statement, he listed 2,000 acres of land at about $75 an acre. If you take the land that he has in his at the present value that it's being sold for in his own neighborhood, you'll find his net worth is greater than mine. So what does that mean? That I'm not a multimillionaire, he's not a poor farmer. So actually, what difference does that make to the governor's race? The truth of the matter is, it makes no difference. A man's real wealth is in the good that he can do. I want to mention a couple of things about his record now and about my record and talk about some things that you people at home are interested in now as citizens, and particularly interested in as to what is going to happen here in this state the next 4 years. In the first place, when my opponent was making his public record and he had an opportunity to cast his vote for matters that are vital concern to each and every one of you at home, he cast the votes all right, but he cast those votes in a manner different from the way that he talks about them today. when he had an opportunity to vote for some tax relief for the handicapped, for the elderly, 65 years of age or older, for the little citizen to exempt his personal effects from ad valorem taxation, he voted no. When he had the opportunity to cast his vote to prohibit lotteries in this state or legalize gambling while he was in the state Senate, he voted no. You know and I know how closely intertwined legalized gambling and crime are today. And above and beyond that, when there came a time to vote on what I call the most critical public issue that I think has ever faced the people of this nation or the people of this state, I want to tell you how he voted. And that, my friends, was on the issue of whether or not we would have public prayers in our public schools. And Mr. Carter substituted an amendment in the state Senate that would actually preclude and prevent the conduct of public prayers in the public schools of this state. That amendment had the effect of trying to relate it to what had been handed down by the federal courts. Now, what I'm saying is simply this: all of this facade about being for the working man, about being for the elderly, about being for the poor, about helping those people who cannot help themselves, there's a great deal of difference between the way that his vote was cast on the public record and the way that he talks to you now in this campaign this summer. You can get that record if you want it. It's available to each and every one of you. Finally, I want to say something about my record. It's been talked about this summer. It's been spelled out. You know where I stand on every public issue in this state. You know how I feel about education. You know how I feel about the necessity of helping people who cannot help themselves. You know what we did to bring in new jobs and new industry. You know, during that 4 years in which I served you as governor, we made more progress for all segments of our people than in any other time that I know of. And so really that's all that I need to say about that. What I would like to talk about now for the next several minutes is what are we going to do now, and how do we feel about those things that are concerning you today as a Georgia citizen and will concern you for the next 4 years in this state. And I want to begin by talking about one of the very crucial matters, as I see it, that exist in our state today. And that's what kind of communities are we going to have in Georgia the next 4 years? Are we going to have safe communities? Are we going to be able to allow our wives and our friends, our citizens, walk the streets in safety? Or are we going to have exist what exists now? The other night, a friend of mine's wife went out to collect funds for a charity drive, and she was attacked. And many friends of mine, and yours now, dare not allow their wives to go out on the street at night. In fact, I talked with a friend of mine in South Georgia the other day, a man. He told me he's carrying a gun. I don't want a state in which people are afraid to go out on the streets. I don't want a state where men are going to carry guns. You don't want that kind of state. We've got to provide the environment and the climate in this state to make it safe for our children and for our families and for our friends. And I'll do that as governor of this state when you elect me. And not only do we need to talk about the safe streets, I was a graduate, or I am a graduate of the University of Georgia. My daughter will be there in September. Last spring, the whole university system was shut down because a handful of radical people decided that they would interrupt the educational process of the great majority. I don't want to see that happen anymore. I want to see the University of Georgia and every school in this state operated as an institution of learning. And if a handful of radicals wishes to take over one of these campuses, I want to see them removed, and removed immediately. Let me talk about another part of education, because I know how you are thinking when it comes to the elementary and secondary schools. I want to talk about the community school. I want to talk about the neighborhood school, if that's a better term for it. I want to say to you that I don't believe that busing students around one school to get to another is either good for education or good for the citizens of this state. Instead of sending a boy or a girl on a school bus 3 or 4 hours a day, I would rather be hiring a remedial teacher to help them get a better education. And I feel like if there's anything that we need in this state, it is that we need good schools run by good teachers, but we need those schools in the community where the pupils live. And that means freedom of choice. And what's wrong with freedom of choice? Freedom of choice was a fundamental principle upon which this country was founded. Our forefathers came from England in order to worship, and it was their free choice that they came over here and created out of this wilderness the greatest nation the world has ever known. So I stand foursquare for freedom of choice today, and I'll fight for it, and I'll work for it, and I'll help you and every other citizen in Georgia do whatever it takes to try and preserve it and protect it and convince the courts of this nation that this is an important doctrine that should be preserved and should not be destroyed. Finally, I want to mention property taxes. As I've mentioned earlier, my opponent was not very kind when he voted not to give property tax relief. But I think today that the governor should go all out to cut the property taxes in this state. And by that I mean simply that there are too many people today who have small homes, who are on limited incomes, many of you who are already retired from business and have no other way of getting an income, who are having to be concerned about selling your property because of the high taxes that you have to pay. I intend to cut those property taxes, and I will cut them as governor of Georgia. And if there's one other thing that I would like to bring out tonight that I think is vital to every man and woman in this state, is this right of the individual and the right of our state to run its own affairs. We have got to make it perfectly clear to Washington and to any other level of government that we have the capacity ourselves to operate this state in the best interest of our people. And I intend to do that. And if I have to criticize some other level of government, I'm going to do it, because it is my duty and my responsibility, and as one who loves this state, to make sure that we don't turn the affairs of our government over to outside interference and to outside intervention when we ourselves have the capacity to do whatever it takes to make Georgia a great state and to operate it for the benefit of our own people. Now, you know where I stand on the issues of freedom of choice and busing and neighborhood schools and crime in the streets and campus disorders and cutting property taxes. Now, wouldn't it have been wonderful tonight if my opponent had accepted my invitation to come before you, the people, and debate these issues, and you would know where he stands? But he did not do that. It's not important that Carl Sanders be governor. But what is important is that any man who wants to be governor should be willing to come and face the people and discuss the vital issues of this campaign. Now, there's one matter that I'd like to talk with you about before I conclude tonight. And that's something that I think you already realize. That's how important your vote will be in this election. You know, we are the only nation left in the world where we still have true self-government. And if you are not willing to go down and cast that ballot, then someday we too will lose that privilege. I want to thank every one of you who turned out and voted for me on September the 9th. I want to urge those who did not vote to come out in this election and cast their ballot. I need your help. I need your support. And I'm willing to accept the mandate of our people if they will turn out on the election day. And if that mandate is such that I have the privilege of serving you again, I will serve you for 4 years as your governor. And I will give to you the best that I have. I will make you proud that we live in this great state and that we are free people who have the opportunity to elect our officials and to give to our children and our grandchildren a better way of life than we've had. I want to thank you for listening to me tonight, and I want to say to each and every one of you, God bless you, and good night.
This has been a paid political program, paid for by the committee to elect Carl Sanders, governor of Georgia.